Hey guys! So today we're going to be creating a nautical end table using mostly Dollar Tree items. I got first 18 of these gather signs, 2 packs of the wooden rulers, which come 2 per pack. I grabbed some contact paper of faux wood that I had. But if you want to save more money on this project, then using the contact paper isn't necessary. I also grabbed some small clamps, which also turned out to be not totally necessary, but it's up to you, your personal preference. Okay, first I grabbed some needle nose pliers and I just simply removed the hanging part on the back of each one of the gather signs, and it comes off pretty easy. Okay, now that that is done and you have removed all the hanging pieces on the back of the signs, which I do recommend saving them because I do use a few of them later. Now you're going to take 6 of the gather signs, and I'm using this super glue from the Dollar Tree, which I ended up using a little too much. I've never tried this particular one before. I usually use E6000, but I thought I'd give this a try since it is at the Dollar Tree. I don't love it. I feel like you don't get very much and it gets used quickly, although then again I did use quite a lot. So anyways, I just simply glued each one of these 6 pieces together, and I used the clamps to hold them, but like I said earlier, I found out that it's not necessary to use them, nor is it necessary to use as many as I did, but again, personal preference, whatever you feel better about, if you feel it's more secure to put them together like this. But I found just pushing them up against each other, they seem to hold pretty well. So before it actually started drying, when I was done putting them together, I moved it to a piece of wax paper or parchment paper, and therefore it doesn't adhere to the cutting mat that I was putting it together on. That way I can just peel it off later. So now all I'm doing is taking 4 more of those signs, and I've placed 2 of them on their sides on the end, and I'm just pushing it all the way to the very edge of the 6 signs that are glued together, just so that way I can create the next layer of the tabletop. So now with the other 2 pieces, I am just measuring the space in between the other 2, so that way I can cut it and they can fit nicely together. So here I'm just making sure that I'm measuring where I had marked off and then putting the exact measurement on the other side, so that way it is an even line across there. Now that you have those lines marked, I just used a hacksaw to cut through it. You can always use an X-Acto knife or a box cutter that might have a little more control for you, since this is a little hard to start with because it tends to jump around until you start to get the groove. But it worked. I just thought I'd try it to see if it was faster. So next, since you see that those are now flat because they have no support that's keeping the shape, I took the corner pieces in the ends of it and I just popped those out using the needle nose pliers again. Now I'm just going to take that same glue that I used earlier and I'm going to put it on the little pieces, the 90-degree part, That way I can push it back into that corner and make it create the same shape again. But I quickly realized, sorry, my voice got high there. I quickly realized that since it doesn't dry fast, that it is not going to hold. So I also had to use a little bit of the hot glue just so that way it will hold quickly and not pull apart, and that way it has time to dry, because the super glue will make it more of a permanent hold, and the hot glue will just help to keep it in its place a lot faster. So that's why I went ahead and just used both for the rest of the pieces. So now that all those corner pieces are glued and dried in place, I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue around the edge of those and push them to the two end pieces that I had measured this piece to be in between originally. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully looking at it makes a lot more sense than how I'm describing it. Sometimes it's easier to do things than to explain what you did, but hopefully you can see and it makes sense. Now that all the four pieces are attached, I'm switching over to the E6000 because that is the glue that I prefer to use. I am going to just put that right along the very edge, the outer edge of the entire little square that I formed using those four pieces. And as you can see here, hopefully it now makes sense that those two pieces that you cut are in between the two pieces that you did not cut, which created the square. And just putting that all along the outer edge, trying to get it as close to the outer edge as possible without it dripping down the outer sides. I went ahead and also put a tiny bit along the edge where the four meet, just as an extra hold, I guess, just in case. Because even though I'm not going to put a lot of weight on this, I still want it, you know, to stay together and not fall apart. So now I just flip that over and I line it up as best as possible. It may not be perfect, but that's fine. I don't want it to necessarily be perfect because I do like the distressed look. So I'm just pushing this as best as possible, centered, to make sure that it lines up and will glue together. And next I did take a little bit of the hot glue, and every part where it meets, sorry, I couldn't think of my words, where it meets, I just put a tiny little bit of hot glue just as an extra hold for it until it dries completely with the E6000. Okay, for the legs, I do apologize, but for some reason it didn't record. For each leg, I did use 2 of the signs, and I just popped off one of the ends on each of the short side of each sign, so that way I could attach them together without them being crooked, because trust me, if you leave that on there, they will be extremely crooked. So popping those off helped, and I used a level. I just glued each one on at a time, each sign, not each leg. Each sign I glued on one at a time, and I used the ends on the inside of them, as you can see here, to make it more secure. And at the bottom, if you can see, that's where I used those leftover pieces, the hanging part of each sign that I told you to save. I used those at the bottom just to make it extra secure. And here's where I'm showing you that I had used a level just to make sure that each piece was level before I glued on the top parts, or I guess the bottom parts of each leg, depending on how you look at it. So for this next part, I used 2 Rust-Oleum products. It's the top of the table. I used any white spray paint. I just happen to have high gloss on hand, but I didn't want it to be glossy, so I went over it with the chalked ultra matte paint in linen white. And then this is where the rulers come into play. I just cut them down. I cut off the circle parts, like the holes in them, and I just cut them down so that way they fit in between each leg. And this is where you can decide if you want them to go on the inside or the outside of each leg. Now, here's where my video somehow turned vertical, which is irritating, but these are the paints that I used to dry brush onto the tabletop. And I just used some foam 1-inch brushes. So first I took this paint and I just dry brushed each color on, and in between each color I let it dry. So I just dip a little bit onto my brush and I just brush it on, as simple as that. And sorry if I'm talking really fast, I'm just trying to get it all in since it didn't record what I had done earlier. And again, I am really sorry for that. I don't know what's going on. Since I seem to be having lots of issues with my camera not recording and then turning vertical. So, yay! Sorry! Now make sure that when you are putting on each color that you are not completely covering the previous color, so that way all the colors can show. And also make sure that you are giving it enough time to dry in between each layer. Again, it will depend on how thick you put on the paint, but you don't really want the colors to mix together because you do want to see each individual color popping through. And that's what gives it the really cool distressed look. Now for this next part, this is the very tip top of the table. I actually, well, first I measured each of them to make sure, because I was going to cut my, instead of just putting on the contact paper of the faux wood, the different kinds of wood would not line up with the size of each sign, if that makes sense. So what I did is I measured them and then I cut out a piece of the faux wood of the contact paper for each different kind of wood color that they have on there. As you can see, I cut it out so that way it looks like each sign is an actual piece of wood. I hope, see, there you see, there's a one that I cut out. So instead of it being super thick and wider than the sign, it now will fit perfectly on there. But as you will see in a second, after putting it on, I realized that my contact paper is kind of see-through and you could see the words and the design on top of the sign. So I had to then peel it off and paint it. Now at this point, if you do not want to use contact paper to save even more money, you can just go ahead and paint it like you did the sides with the dry brushing. That looks super cool too. I just happen to have this on hand, which is why I wanted to use it. It also matches a frame that I had put this contact paper on, so that's why I wanted to use it. But again, it's whatever you want. You don't even have to make this look like a nautical table. It could be any design that you want. Just, you know, have fun with it. That's what crafting is, just having fun and being creative, and yeah, so whatever you want. But yeah, as you can see through it, and so I had to peel it off and paint it. And what I did was I just used, since I didn't want to spray paint it and get it down on the sides, I just used that Rust-Oleum linen white chalked paint, and I just painted it. And then after that was completely dry, I did 3 layers. I then put the contact paper back on there, as you will see in a minute. So now that I have all 3 layers on, I'm just going to use those 6 pieces of the contact paper and put them on each section of the signs. And again, at this point, you would dry brush on the paint if you do not want to use the contact paper. But again, I had it on hand and I thought it looked cool and it matched the frame, so I used it. After you finish with the top, just flip it over, and now I'm going to be using this nautical rope from the Dollar Tree and some hot glue, and I think I used just a little over 3 of each pack of the ropes for each leg. Again, you do not have to do this. You can paint the legs or whatever you would like, but I just thought that the rope added more of a nautical feel to it. So that's why I went with this. And I think total I used 13 packs. And in a little bit I will show you how much I had left over after I was finished. So what I was doing there was I was just putting some hot glue on the end of the rope just so it wouldn't fray. And then I put a little hot glue on the edge, and I am putting it on the inside of the leg. And then I put hot glue around the bottom ledge and I'm just wrapping the rope around. Now, I don't use hot glue on the entire leg. I only put it when I'm starting off with each piece of rope and when I'm finishing each piece of rope. So that way it holds those pieces in place, of course. But as far as the rest of it, I just wrap it. And the leg parts of wrapping this rope around is the most time consuming, and I got a little irritated because it was taking much longer than I anticipated. So all I did was I just took some breaks, and I mean, you can watch something while you're doing this, you can listen to music, or like I said, you could just skip this step altogether and do something else with the legs. But this is what I wanted to do, and it was totally worth it in the end to me. But again, it's whatever you want. Just have fun. So here I am just finishing off one of the legs, and near the end I wanted to put hot glue the whole way just so that way it doesn't slip off the bottom. I just felt like that made it a little more secure and to have a peace of mind about it. And then here I was debating whether or not I wanted to put an extra layer, but then I decided to go ahead and do it because I didn't want any of that sign to show. Like if you put it on a hardwood floor, you know, there's not going to be carpet there or anything to cover it, so that's why I went ahead and did it. Now it does stick up a little bit, but as long as you get it pretty level with the rope or with hot glue, it's pretty fine. I used mine on a carpeted area, so it didn't matter that much anyways. But if you're doing it on a hardwood floor, you can always turn it over and see if it's wobbly. And if it is, you can always add those little sticky pads on the bottom, or you could add more rope, or you could add more hot glue, just whatever to make it sturdy. But in my case, it worked fine. So here I just snip it off at an angle, and then I will glue it down, and I will also put hot glue all over. And be very generous with the hot glue, especially on the ends, because you don't want it to unravel and fall apart, especially on the bottom of a leg. And since this glue gun that I'm using is low temp, I was able to touch it immediately to kind of press it into place, and it didn't hurt. But if I use my other hot glue gun, that thing hurts. Oh my, I've gotten some bad burns, so just be careful and be safe. Okay, now that they are completely covered, this is how much I have left over from the 10 packs of rope. Now, it will depend on how tight you make this, like how firm you pull, and how tight you push down on the rope. So for me, that's how much I had left over. And now, since I decided it looks like a cat scratching post, which I did not want, I decided I was going to use those 2 colors of paint that I used earlier on dry brushing onto the tabletop, and I'm just going to paint on the bottom of the legs, doing an ombre effect, darker to lighter. So yeah, I think it gave it some more character, and it made it look cooler than just a cat scratching post. So I mean, if you want a cat scratching post for your cats, then by all means do it, but I did not, so that's why I decided to use the paint. And I just carefully just brush it on and like brush it down. Now, yes, this will make it more textured, I should say, like it brings out all the little tiny strings everywhere, but I think it looks much cooler than it did when I just left it just the rope. So this is how the legs turned out when they were finished, and like I said, I think it's super cool, and it adds a little bit something extra than just the plain rope on the legs. Now for the rulers, after they had been cut down to the size that I wanted them for the legs, I ended up painting them similar to the tabletop, which you'll see in the end. I ended up not liking that, and I just covered them with the contact paper that I had used on the very top of the table. But in case you decide to paint them and not use contact paper, then this is how I did it. But again, it's the same technique that I used on the tabletop itself. However, I was a little impatient and didn't wait for each layer to dry, so they mixed a little bit and I wasn't totally happy. But in this case, I did not spray paint it first. I just went ahead and went in with the chalked paint, and then I used the same colors as before to dry brush on top. And I do also recommend painting both sides of the ruler, just because when you glue it onto the legs, you will be able to see both sides, and it will look funny if one side is unfinished. Now that you have finished painting the rulers and they have dried, or putting contact paper covering both sides of them, you can decide if you want them to go in the front or the back of the legs. And I'm just showing you that the smaller ones I put on the side that was the smaller section, and the bigger ones on the bigger section. So just make sure you're putting them in the right spot. And I ended up, and you can see here, I did not paint the back sides of them originally, and that's why I said you should, because you can totally see it, and I just think it doesn't look finished. And I ended up deciding to put them on the inside, as you'll see in the end, and I thought it looked much better, but again, it's whatever you decide you want to do. And as you can see by the strings and hot glue already on the rulers, I have put them on and taken them off several times because I didn't know what I wanted. And when I'd put it on, I didn't like it, so I just switched it around. But I'm just using hot glue and I'm lining it up, and I do use a level to make sure that they are as straight as possible on there. Again, it's not necessarily going to be perfect, but I just wanted them to be as straight as possible. And they are easy to pull off, and it does not ruin the rope if you do make a mistake, but that doesn't mean that they're going to just fall off like immediately because they come off semi-easy. You do have to give it a little tug. But yeah, so even with this, I just decided I liked it better to match the top of the table since I had used the contact paper, which is why you'll see in the end that I had covered them with the contact paper. And since I did put them on the insides, I did make 2 of them higher and 2 of them lower, just because the way that it's set up, you have to do it that way. They can't go right next to each other. But I think it's cool doing that as well. Now, if you do want to make these more permanent, I do recommend also using E6000 as well as hot glue. Like earlier, the hot glue will make it hold immediately, but the E6000 will give it a permanent hold in the long run. But I wasn't concerned about that, so I just used hot glue. But yeah, if you do want to make it, you know, more permanent and more sturdy, then I do recommend using the E6000. But as you can see, it's pretty easy to just glue it against it and using the level to make it even, and I think it's super fun and cool. But I do recommend, like I said earlier, covering both sides because it just makes it look more finished and complete. And there you have it, guys, a nautical end table, which I think turned out super cute. I love all the little details on it, and it matches perfectly in my bathroom area that I've already done a lot of nautical things, like that basket that I made, and I made lots of other little crafts. But I think it turned out really well. And there's my finger in the camera for some reason, but as you can see, the leg area where I covered it with the contact paper, and I just think it matches better since I had already used contact paper on top. So yeah, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed making it for you, and I think it turned out really well. So don't forget to subscribe before you leave, hit the like button, and hit the notification bell so you can be alerted every time I upload a video. Thanks, guys. See you next time.